The soft glow of the mall's evening lights reflected off the sleek glass storefronts, casting a golden hue over bustling shoppers. Samuel Rhodes moved through the crowd with an air of purpose that was hard to ignore. Tall, poised, and impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, he embodied the effortless power of a man who owned entire corporations, not just shares in them. But tonight, his usually sharp focus faltered. His mind was elsewhere, on deals, meetings, perhaps a twinge of discontent he couldn't quite place. Samuel paused outside a boutique window, checking his reflection. His 35-year-old face stared back, a visage of success marred only by faint lines around his eyes. It was a face the world admired, envied even, yet a hollow feeling gnawed at him. He brushed it aside, attributing it to fatigue. A sudden burst of laughter rang out nearby. He turned instinctively toward the sound, his eyes drawn to a woman standing in front of a toy store. She was bent down, adjusting the coat of a young boy who squirmed impatiently. Another child, a girl, clung to her hand, chattering away. Samuel's heart seized painfully. That laugh, he knew that laugh. He hadn't heard it in 8 years, yet it was unmistakable. The woman straightened, her long auburn hair cascading down her back. She glanced around, and Samuel's breath caught in his throat. It was her, Lila. The memory of her name echoed in his mind like a bell, tolling regret and memories he'd buried deep. She looked different, stronger, more self-assured, but the softness in her eyes remained. Her gaze drifted across the crowd and locked onto his. For a moment, time fractured. Her smile vanished, replaced by a mixture of shock and something else he couldn't decipher. The children tugged at her hands, oblivious to the tension that filled the space between them. The boy looked up, his eyes sparkling with curiosity, and when Samuel saw the child's face, the world tilted on its axis, because staring back at him was his own reflection. 2 sets of identical brown eyes. Samuel felt as if the ground had been yanked out from beneath him. He staggered back a step, his mind scrambling to make sense of what he was seeing. Twins. His twins. He couldn't breathe. Lila's face hardened. She turned abruptly, her grip on the children tightening. The girl looked back curiously, but Lila guided them swiftly away. The crowd swallowed them, but Samuel was already moving, following them with a desperation he hadn't known he was capable of. "Lila!" he called out, his voice raw, breaking through the murmur of the crowd. But she didn't stop, didn't turn around. He pushed past people, barely aware of his surroundings. Panic surged through his veins like fire. She was slipping away, again, and this time he couldn't let that happen. When he finally caught up, she was near the parking garage, fumbling for her keys with trembling fingers. "Lila," he called more gently this time. She froze, her back still turned. Her shoulders rose and fell with a shaky breath. After a moment, she turned to face him, her eyes blazing with controlled fury. "What do you want, Samuel?" Her voice was sharp, but there was pain hidden beneath the steel. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the twins. The boy clutched a toy car, staring curiously at the stranger who shared his features. The girl hid behind her mother's leg, her wide eyes peeking out cautiously. "They're mine," Samuel whispered, the weight of the realization crashing down on him. Lila's jaw tightened. "You don't get to claim them now." He staggered back, her words a punch to the gut. The world around him dimmed, narrowing to just her, and the 2 children he hadn't known existed. His mind spiraled, memories colliding with the harsh reality before him. 8 years ago he had left her. His marriage had crumbled under the relentless pressure of his ambition. He convinced himself it was for the best, that she deserved more than the fragments of a man who couldn't balance love and power. He thought he was sparing her, but he hadn't known. "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "Lila, I didn't know." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "You didn't ask." A silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. The past roared in his ears, drowning out the present. "I need to explain," he pleaded. "Please." She shook her head. "You can't just walk back into our lives and expect everything to be fine." "I know," he said, the words burning his throat. "But they're my children. I need to know them, and they deserve to know me." A tear escaped her eye and slid down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. The twins were watching, their young faces painted with confusion and uncertainty. "I won't let you hurt them," she whispered. His heart cracked open. "I won't. I swear, Lila." She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing the pieces of the shattered man in front of her. Then she knelt down, her arms encircling the children. "Come on, let's go home," she murmured. The boy glanced back at Samuel. "Who's that man, Mommy?" Her voice trembled, barely audible. "Just someone I used to know." She took their hands, turning away. Samuel watched helplessly as they walked toward her car, each step taking them further away from him. The past he'd tried to escape had finally caught up with him, and this time it wore the faces of two children he never knew he had. As Lila opened the car door, Samuel's heart screamed for him to stop her, to say something, anything, that could fix the chasm between them, but all he could do was stand there, rooted to the spot, as she drove away. And for the first time in his life, Samuel Rhodes felt utterly, devastatingly lost. Lila gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, as the road stretched out before her. The mall lights faded in the rearview mirror, but the image of Samuel standing there, stunned, desperate, burned in her mind. Her heart pounded, each beat a chaotic rhythm of fear, anger, and a sliver of something she refused to acknowledge. From the back seat, Mason's voice broke through her haze. "Mommy, who was that man?" She swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak steadily. "No one you need to worry about, baby." Mason exchanged a look with his sister, Emma. "He looked like me," he said softly. Lila's throat tightened. They were too smart for their own good. Emma stayed quiet, her eyes fixed on the passing streetlights, her little brow furrowed in thought. Unlike Mason, Emma was reserved, always observing before speaking. She felt things deeply, just like Lila did. And right now, Lila could feel her daughter's confusion like a physical weight. She pulled into the driveway of their small suburban house, a modest two-bedroom home with a patchy lawn and a mailbox that leaned slightly to the left. It wasn't luxurious, but it was theirs. Safe, cozy, and filled with love. "Okay, my loves," she said, forcing a smile. "Let's get inside. It's getting late." The twins unbuckled themselves and tumbled out of the car. Mason immediately ran to the porch to retrieve his favorite red ball, while Emma clung to Lila's hand. "Mommy," Emma whispered, her big brown eyes searching Lila's face. "You looked sad when you saw that man." Lila's heart cracked just a little more. She knelt down, brushing a strand of hair behind Emma's ear. "Sometimes grown-ups remember things that make them sad, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean you have to worry about it, okay?" Emma nodded slowly, but Lila could tell she wasn't convinced. Inside, the house welcomed them with the familiar scent of lavender from the diffuser in the living room. Mason kicked off his sneakers, sending them flying in different directions. Emma neatly placed hers by the door. The routine was comforting, an anchor in the storm of emotions swirling inside Lila. After dinner, a simple meal of spaghetti and meatballs, the twins settled on the couch, Mason engrossed in his toy cars, Emma coloring quietly. Lila lingered in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she washed the dishes. Her mind was a whirlpool of memories, all of them dragging her back to a time she'd tried to forget, 8 years ago. She had been 25, wide-eyed and hopelessly in love with Samuel Rhodes. He had been her everything, the man who made her feel seen, cherished. But Samuel's ambitions grew faster than their love could keep up. Late nights at the office turned into missed dinners, forgotten anniversaries, and an emptiness she couldn't fill. And then, one cold winter night, he left. "I can't do this anymore, Lila," he'd said, his eyes cold and distant. "I'm not what you need, you deserve more." She'd begged him to stay, to fight for what they had, but his mind was made up, and just like that, he was gone. It was only weeks later that she discovered she was pregnant. By then, Samuel was unreachable, a ghost of a life that had vanished. She had considered finding him, telling him the truth, but pride, fear, and anger held her back. He hadn't wanted her. He wouldn't want the children either. So she built a life without him. Now that life felt like it was teetering on the edge of collapse. A knock at the door jolted her out of her thoughts. Her heart slammed into her ribs. She dried her hands, forcing her breathing to steady. When she opened the door, she almost closed it again. Samuel stood there, his expression guarded yet vulnerable. The porch light cast shadows on his face, making him look older, wearier. "Lila," he said softly. She clenched the door handle. "You shouldn't be here. Please," he said, his voice breaking. "I just want to talk." She hesitated, torn between slamming the door in his face and the ache in her heart that still, after all these years, longed for answers. "5 minutes," she said tightly, stepping back. He entered, his eyes sweeping over the cozy living room, lingering on the drawings pinned to the fridge, the tiny shoes by the door. Evidence of a life he hadn't known existed. He turned to face her, his eyes shimmering with emotion. "They're beautiful, Lila." Her throat constricted. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't act like you care now," she snapped. "You left, Samuel. You made your choice." He flinched, pain flickering across his face. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was setting you free." "Free?" She laughed bitterly. "You didn't set me free, Samuel. You abandoned me." "I was an idiot," he admitted, his voice thick with regret. "I thought I was sparing you from my world, from the chaos. But all I did was destroy what we had." She shook her head, tears welling up. "It doesn't matter anymore." "It does," he said fiercely. "It matters because I lost you. And now I've lost 8 years of my children's lives. I can't fix the past, but I want to be part of their future. Please, let me try." Her heart warred with itself. The anger she'd nurtured for years clashed with the memory of the man she'd once loved, the man who stood before her now, broken and pleading. A small voice interrupted them. "Mommy." They both turned to see Emma standing in the hallway, her eyes wide with curiosity and fear. Samuel's face softened. "Hi," he said gently. Emma looked at him for a long moment, then turned to Lila. "Who is he?" Lila's lips trembled. She knelt down, brushing her daughter's hair back. This is your dad." Emma's eyes widened. "Our dad?" Lila nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes, baby." Emma studied Samuel carefully. Then, with the simplicity only a child could possess, she asked, "Are you staying?" Samuel's eyes filled with tears. He looked at Lila, his gaze a silent plea. Lila's heart shattered and mended all at once. She didn't have an answer. Not yet. Let's just take it one step at a time," she whispered. Samuel nodded, hope flickering in his eyes. It was a fragile start, but for the first time in 8 years, the door to the past wasn't entirely closed. And maybe, just maybe, the future held something worth fighting for. Samuel sat in his car outside Lila's house, gripping the steering wheel as if it were a lifeline. The night air was cool, the sky a blanket of stars that seemed to mock his confusion. His heart still pounded with the weight of Lila's words. "Let's just take it one step at a time." He knew that wasn't a promise, not really. It was a tentative truce, one that could shatter at the slightest misstep, but it was more than he deserved. In his mind's eye he saw Mason and Emma's faces, their curious eyes peering at him with a mix of confusion and innocence. They were his children, a truth that still felt too massive to grasp. How could he make up for 8 lost years? Samuel rubbed his face, exhaustion settling into his bones. He needed a plan, a way to show Lila that he was serious. But more than anything, he needed to earn the right to be called their father. The next morning, Lila stood at the kitchen counter, staring into her coffee as if it held the answers she needed. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual. The twins were still sleeping, the soft rise and fall of their breathing a reminder of how fragile her world felt right now. She couldn't stop thinking about Samuel, the way he'd looked at the kids, like they were his entire world, and maybe they were, but she couldn't let herself trust him so easily. A sharp knock at the door jolted her out of her thoughts. She hesitated, her pulse quickening. Drawing in a breath, she opened the door. Samuel stood there, holding a small brown paper bag. His eyes were tired but determined. "I brought breakfast," he said, holding the bag up like an offering. "Donuts, the kind you used to love." Her lips tightened, memories tugging at the edges of her resolve. "Stop remembering," she scolded herself, but she stepped aside, letting him in. The smell of sugar and coffee filled the kitchen as Samuel set the bag down. He looked around, taking in the little details of their life, the drawings on the fridge, the stack of school books, the small toy cars scattered on the floor. "Where are they?" he asked softly. "Still sleeping," Lila said, crossing her arms. "They wake up soon." Samuel nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Lila, I don't want to force myself into their lives. I want to help. In any way you'll let me." She leaned against the counter, studying him. There was sincerity in his eyes, but sincerity wasn't enough. Not after everything. "Help how?" she asked cautiously. "Let me spend time with them," he said. "Get to know them, even if it's just a few minutes a day. I'll take whatever you'll give me." Her heart ached. He was asking for so little, and yet it felt like so much. Before she could respond, Small footsteps padded into the kitchen. Mason appeared, his hair tousled and eyes still heavy with sleep. "Mommy?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. Then he saw Samuel. The boy froze, his gaze darting between his mother and the man he didn't quite know. Samuel's heart lodged in his throat. "Hey, buddy," Samuel said softly. "I'm Samuel." Mason frowned. "You were at the mall?" Samuel nodded. "Yeah, I was." Mason stared at him for a moment longer, then his eyes fell on the bag. "What's that?" "Donuts," Samuel said with a small smile. "You like donuts?" Mason's face lit up. "Yeah." Emma appeared behind her brother, peeking out cautiously. Lila's heart squeezed as Samuel knelt down to their level, holding the bag out. "I got some for you too," he said gently. Emma hesitated, then took a step forward. She glanced at Lila, who nodded, trying to smile. "It's okay, sweetheart." Emma took the bag from Samuel, her small hands clutching it tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. Samuel's eyes glistened. "You're welcome." They sat at the kitchen table, the twins munching on donuts, the air thick with an unspoken tension. Samuel watched them, memorizing every detail, the way Mason chewed with a little too much enthusiasm, the way Emma took careful, delicate bites. "Are you our daddy?" Mason asked suddenly, his mouth full. Lila stiffened. Samuel's throat closed up. He glanced at Lila, seeking permission. She nodded ever so slightly. "Yes," Samuel said, his voice trembling. "I'm your dad." Mason's eyes widened. "How come we didn't know you before?" The question punched Samuel in the gut. He looked down, shame washing over him. "That's my fault," he said. "But I'm here now, and I want to be here for you." Mason studied him, his young mind processing more than Samuel gave him credit for. Then, with the simplicity only a child could possess, he said, "Okay." Emma wasn't so quick to trust. She eyed Samuel with cautious skepticism, her small fingers playing with the edge of her napkin. "Will you go away again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel's chest tightened. He leaned forward, his eyes level with hers. "No," he promised. "I'm not going anywhere." Emma nodded slowly, but her eyes held a glimmer of doubt. Samuel knew he would have to prove his words with actions. Over the next few weeks, Samuel showed up every morning. Sometimes he brought donuts, other times he brought books or small toys. He played with the twins, read them stories and listened to their endless chatter about school and friends. He learned that Mason loved cars and dinosaurs, and that Emma loved to draw, and was terrified of thunderstorms. Lila watched from the sidelines, her walls cracking bit by bit. Samuel was patient, consistent, and kind. He never pushed, never overstepped, and the twins began to warm to him. One rainy afternoon, as they sat together building a Lego tower, Emma climbed onto Samuel's lap and handed him a crayon. "Draw with me?" she asked. Samuel's eyes filled with tears. He cleared his throat. "Of course, sweetheart." Lila's heart twisted. She turned away, tears blurring her vision. Maybe, just maybe, Samuel was changing, but could she risk believing it? She didn't have an answer. Not yet. And just when things seemed to be settling into a fragile new normal, life threw them a curveball neither of them saw coming. The rain poured steadily, drumming against the roof like a persistent memory. Lila stood by the kitchen window, watching rivulets of water trace chaotic patterns down the glass. The twins were in the living room, giggling as Samuel helped Mason assemble a model airplane, while Emma scribbled intently in her sketchbook. It had been 2 months since Samuel re-entered their lives. Each day chipped away at the barriers Lila had built over 8 long years. The children had grown attached, their trust in Samuel deepening like roots in fertile soil. But for Lila, trust wasn't that easy. Samuel's return felt like holding a fragile piece of glass. One wrong move, and everything could shatter. "Mom!" Mason's voice broke her reverie. "Come see the plane. Dad helped me build it." Dad. The word landed heavily in her chest. The first time Mason called him that, she felt like the floor had vanished beneath her feet. It was so natural, so effortless, as though Samuel had never left. But the ease with which the children accepted him only intensified Lila's fear. What if he left again? She pushed the thought aside and forced a smile, walking into the living room. Mason held up the plane, his eyes glowing with pride. "Wow," she said, ruffling his hair. "That's incredible." Samuel smiled, a genuine warmth lighting up his eyes. "Mason did most of the work, I just held the pieces together." Mason grinned. Dad says teamwork is important. Lila's heart clenched. Samuel's gaze met hers, an unspoken question lingering in the air. He was trying so hard, weaving himself back into their lives, one careful step at a time. But was it enough? "Can we go to the park later, Mommy?" Emma asked, looking up from her sketchbook. Lila hesitated, glancing at the rain. "Maybe when it clears up, sweetie." "Please?" Mason pleaded, his eyes wide with hope. "We can wear rain boots." Samuel chuckled. "I think that's a great idea." Lila's resistance crumbled. "Okay, fine. Rain boots it is." The twins cheered, scattering to find their boots and coats. Samuel stood and moved closer to Lila, his voice low. "Thank you for letting me be part of this." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. A fragile understanding hung between them. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. The rain had lessened to a drizzle by the time they arrived at the park. The air was crisp and earthy, the smell of wet grass hanging heavy. The twins raced ahead, splashing in puddles, their laughter mingling with the patter of rain. Samuel and Lila walked side by side, the distance between them narrowing with each step. Samuel glanced at her, his face etched with uncertainty. "Are we going to talk about it?" he asked. "About what?" she replied, though she knew exactly what he meant. "This, us, the past, the future." Lila sighed, her breath fogging in the cool air. "I don't know, Samuel. I see how happy the kids are with you, and I want that for them, but I'm scared." "I know," he said softly. "I'm scared too. Scared I'll never be able to make up for what I did." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "Why did you leave, Samuel?" The truth this time. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I was a coward. I thought success would fill the emptiness I felt. I convinced myself that leaving you was the right thing to do because I didn't think I could give you what you deserved." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "You didn't even give me a choice." "I know," he whispered, "and I regret it every single day." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken pain. Finally, Lila spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you completely, but I see how much you love them, and maybe that's enough for now." Samuel's eyes filled with gratitude. "I'll take that. I'll take whatever you're willing to give." Before she could respond, Mason's voice shattered the moment. "Mom, Dad, look what we found." They turned to see the twins standing by a large oak tree. Emma held something small and trembling in her hands. As they approached, they saw it was a tiny bird, its wing bent at an odd angle. "It's hurt," Emma said, her eyes wide with worry. Lila knelt beside her. "We need to be very gentle." Samuel crouched down too. "We can take it to a wildlife center. They'll know how to help." Emma nodded, carefully transferring the bird into Samuel's cupped hands. For a moment, Lila watched them. Samuel, Emma, Mason, huddled together, united in purpose. And something inside her shifted. Maybe Samuel had broken her heart once, but maybe he was also the only one who could help mend it. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, Lila found Samuel sitting on the porch, the darkness wrapping around him. He looked up as she approached, his eyes weary but hopeful. "The kids are asleep," she said softly. He nodded. "They're amazing, Lila. You did an incredible job with them." Her lips trembled. "I didn't do it alone. I had help from friends, from neighbors. But it was hard, Samuel. So hard." He reached out, hesitating before his fingers brushed hers. "I'm sorry I wasn't there, but I'm here now, and I want to be here for you too, if you'll let me." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I want to believe that, but I need time." "I'll wait," he said, his voice steady. "As long as it takes." She took a deep breath, the weight of the past finally loosening its grip. Maybe we can start over. Not as if the past didn't happen, but in spite of it. A slow smile spread across his face. "I'd like that." For the first time in years, hope bloomed in her chest. They weren't perfect. Their past was messy, painful. But maybe, just maybe, they could build something new. Not a fairy tale, but something real. Something worth fighting for. She squeezed his hand, a silent promise. "Let's take it one step at a time." And as they sat together, the night closing in around them, it felt like the first step toward healing. Not just for them, but for the family they were finally becoming.